Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we're finishing the genealogy in Exodus chapter 6, and I'll offer some closing words on the narrative framing of this genealogy. So welcome back. Reading first from my translation of the Hebrew in Exodus 6, verse 25. We have another break in the grammar of the genealogy. If you haven't watched the previous two videos that lay out the beginning of the genealogy and kind of the themes that emerge through it, I encourage you to pause this video and stop and go back and watch those. Verse 25 reads, "Now Eleazar, son of Aaron, took his wife from the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These were the heads of the fathers of the Levites by their clans." So we have a similar break here that we had before with Aaron taking Elisheba, and before that with Amram taking Jochebed or Jochebed. Here, Eleazar is marrying one of the daughters of Putiel. Putiel is otherwise unnamed in the Bible. We don't know anything about him, but his name is interesting because it is a hybrid Egyptian Semitic name, so that'd be Egyptian Hebrew name, meaning given of God. The fact that one of his daughters marries Eleazar and that he's mentioned here is significant because Eleazar will be a future high priest. He's in the line of Aaron, eligible for high priesthood. Eleazar, in turn, names his son Phineas or Phinehas, which is an Egyptian name meaning Nubian. That may indicate that he had dark skin. Nubia is an area of Africa with dark-skinned people, and so it's possible that the wife of Eleazar is also dark-skinned, and that's why they have a dark-skinned son, and they name him accordingly. Now, why mention Phineas? He is the only member of his generation to be listed in the genealogy, and he's not even born yet at this point in the narrative. We know that because he survives the wilderness generation and serves as the high priest after the entrance into Canaan. So that means he can't be part of the generation that was an adult at the time when they get to Mount Sinai. So Joshua 22:13 mentions him in verses 30 to 32, and also Judges 20:28. So the inclusion of Phineas here hints at his significance going forward and may offer a clue as to who is recording or passing on this narrative. If you continue reading through the Torah, he comes up again in Numbers chapter 25, which is a very significant story that stands kind of at the juncture between the wilderness generation and the generation that will enter the land. So the king of Moab had tried to hire Balaam to curse the Israelites in chapter 22 through 24, and it doesn't work because Balaam is only able to pronounce over them what Yahweh allows, which is only blessing. So God's protecting his people unbeknownst to them. Then in the very next chapter, Numbers chapter 25, Moabite women begin to seduce the men of Israel and entice them to worship other gods. And so Israel becomes their own undoing. Their unfaithfulness ends up bringing God's wrath on them. Phineas shows zeal by becoming an instrument of God's judgment in this time of apostasy. So in chapter Numbers 25:10, the Lord said to Moses, "Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites, since he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am. I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites." This is a significant moment because it's similar to 2 Samuel 7, where God announces that David is going to be king forever, that someone from his line will always be king. Here, God is announcing to Phineas that his line will always be priests. So Numbers 25 is the priestly equivalent of 2 Samuel 7. It's very significant. And we get a hint of that already back here in Exodus 6 because the genealogy goes all the way down to Phineas. It legitimates and justifies his inclusion in the priesthood and probably tells us something about when this is being written and who thinks it's important to pass on this information. So that's the end of the genealogy. We end with Phineas, again, who's not even born yet. And then we have some narrative framing that we already talked about in a previous video, verses 26 and 27. I'll just point out here that if you kind of zoom back and look at the macro view of this genealogy with its narrative frame, you have 4 occurrences of the names of Moses and Aaron. In verse 13, it reads Moses and Aaron. And then in verse 27, Moses and Aaron. So those frame the genealogy. And then in the middle of the genealogy, we get a pivot to Aaron and Moses, starting in verse 20, all the way down to verse 26, where Aaron and Moses are mentioned again. So the first and the last pair frame the whole genealogy, while Aaron takes center stage in the middle of the genealogy because he's the older of the two, and between the two occurrences of Aaron and Moses, you get the families of Aaron and Korah, which are the 2 longest genealogies recorded here. So really interesting narrative patterning here. One last tidbit is that Yahweh uses a military term to describe the people as they exit Egypt, although they have no military training and they will not raise a sword against Pharaoh. Tzabah refers to an army, regiment, or battalion, and here they're leaving Egypt according to their battalions. Later, that same word is going to be used to describe the priestly battalions who guard the tabernacle. Even though they are not, they don't participate in bearing arms, the protection and transportation of the tabernacle is a military assignment. So it's not normally a combat role, but it's a military assignment, and because the tabernacle embodies the presence of God that goes forth with them as they come and enter into the land. So the macro view of this whole passage is a chiasm, because we have in chapter 6 verses 10 through 12 Moses responding to Yahweh's commission by complaining about his lips, and then we have another complaint about his lips in verses 28 to 30, and then inside of that we have Yahweh commissioning Moses and Aaron, verse 13 and verses 26 to 27, and then in the center we have the genealogy, which is the pedigree of Aaron and Moses. So the genealogy is answering the concern that Moses has about not being able to speak well, about having a speech impediment. God provides Aaron, and then we find out Aaron's role in the wider family, and we get a hint at the ongoing role of Aaron's descendants in the priesthood to come. Even though we don't have a tabernacle yet, and God has not established the priesthood, we're getting a sort of sneak preview of what's to come. I hope that's been fun. This is going to be our last Torah Tuesday. I'm going to take the rest of the month of December off so that I can travel to Israel. I'm going on a trip with other academics to learn more. So I'll be in Israel and then Christmas holidays. And so I'll pick it up again, Lord willing, in January with Exodus chapter 7. And we'll get into the narratives that we think of as the 10 plagues. Have a great holiday. Blessings to all of you, and I'll see you in 2023.